Hey everyone, Ryan the Vintage Viking back with you, and I have a top 10 video for you today. I don't think I've done a top 10 video. Maybe I think might have done one with some movies before, but I don't think I've done a top 10 when it comes to books and things like that. So this is going to be a top 10 of the favorite books of mine, or the best books that I've read in 2023 so far. I've read roughly 75 books, somewhere around there, this year so far, and I thought it'd be a good place to kind of stop, take a moment, see which ones out of those I actually really enjoyed and are in the top category for me. So maybe I'll do one around the 8 or 9 month mark, another one around a year or so, and then see if anything changed by then. So let's get into it. Okay, so first up, I do want to have an honorable mention because I did read this in December and it almost pushed into January. And so I can't quite include it in the 2023, but I do want to just point it out because it was a really interesting, enjoyable book. And that is Blood Music by Greg Bear. I read this in December. I think I finished it like a day or two before the new year came in. I might have even been reading it all the way up to New Year's. I can't quite remember, but it was really close to the end of the year. And so just as an honorable mention, not in the top 10, but would have been in the top 10 if it had kind of crested into 2023. But Blood Music is just an all-around enjoyable book. If you like scientific type tinkering, discoveries, that kind of thing, experiments, things having to do with like kind of testing boundaries and toying around with things, you're going to enjoy Blood Music. So really quickly, Blood Music is about this scientist named Virgil, and Virgil creates these things called Genocides, and his goal is to kind of advance medical science to maybe try to get something to evolve into something else, to be able to be used for all kinds of stuff. I guess it could be technically things like that could be used for good, for bad, what have you. But he's tinkering around with it. He's fooling around with it, and at a certain point, his higher ups start seeing an issue with this. He's kind of pushing boundaries that are not allowed and things like that. And they want to shut him down. And so they tell him he has to be done with it. He has to wrap it up. And so he decides to, this is too important, too valuable. He's put too much time into it. So he wants to not give up. So he takes the neurocytes and he throws them into a syringe, and he plunges that bad boy into himself and fires him into his own body. And so from there, I mean, that's kind of the very beginning of the book, not too big of a spoiler. And from there, it goes on to really things that happen graphically throughout himself and others. And one of the things I really loved about this book that made it more enjoyable for me is that a part of it takes place in Livermore, California. And I used to live in Livermore, California, and I grew up kind of sort of near the area, but I'd visit there a lot because I had family. And he's talking about things like the Livermore Lab, Vasco Road, things like that, and he's using these references, and I know exactly where they are. So for me, I was literally picturing the place that he's talking about in like what it really looks like. And so that was kind of fun and enjoyable for me and made it a little more interesting. And so all in all, Blood Music, great book, highly recommend it. I suggest you check it out if you're a science fiction reader, for sure. Even if you're a horror reader, you'd probably enjoy this. There's some good body horror and some other stuff in it as well. So Blood Music, honorable mention, would have made the top 10, didn't quite cut it because it was not in 2023. All right, next up we have Clive Barker's The Hellbound Heart. This is the basis for the Hellraiser movies. I really enjoyed this novella. It was fairly short, but pretty enjoyable. It is way better than the movie. If you liked the movie, you will love this. The book takes place really all in one location. It's basically in this one house. We have the main character starting out as Frank Cotton, and Frank is just he's kind of a scuzzbucket. He really wants to explore anything kind of having to do with pleasure and expanding those senses. It starts out pretty strong, so reader beware if you're sensitive to graphic details. This one's probably not going to be for you. It is not um, it's not a YA novel by any means. So along the way, Frank finds this like puzzle box, and he starts fooling around with this puzzle box. So as he's messing around with that box, the puzzle box, he basically summons these supernatural beings called the Cenobites. And the Cenobites are like masters of torture, of pain, and they say pleasure, but it doesn't seem very pleasurable. And so they take Frank and they basically pull him into this nightmarish realm where he's constantly tortured. As we move along, we find that Frank's brother Rory moves into the house that Frank lived in with his wife, and they are staying in the house. And we find out that in the past that Rory, Frank's brother, his wife, Rory's wife, had an affair with Frank. And so there's some history that's going on there, and Rory's wife didn't know what happened and where Frank went, and she finds out that she starts to find out how she can get him back, or try to get him back, and then it just goes chaotic from there. And so it is a lot of body horror also. There's very graphic details, and it is just an enjoyable horror, lightly disturbing type book that I think people who are into that will enjoy thoroughly. I have yet to read other Clive Barker, so I'm very excited, and I'm hoping this is not like kind of one of the best, and I'm going to be disappointed. From what I understand, Clive Barker has some seriously good novels, so looking forward to it. And number 10 of 2023. Next up, we have number 9 on the list, and it is The Genocides by Thomas Disch. Thomas Disch has become one of my favorite authors here recently. I've just really enjoyed his writing style and everything that I've read from him. I've read some short stories. After this, I've just loved, and I've kind of just been picking up what I can from Disch. So The Genocides by Thomas Disch is a science fiction story with some horror elements to it. It's a different type of horror. It's not like a terror type. It is more the horrors of human nature kind of thing, and the horrors of desperation, things like that. So that's what I would say is horrific about it. It is quite an enjoyable book. It is a page turner, as they say. It was really fun to read, really enjoyable. Basically, these things called the genocides have taken over the earth. There are these plants that are invading, or that have been planted and invade and basically root and go everywhere, and they're just devouring the earth. They're the main focus of our story is focused around one group, and this group is trying to survive. And as they're trying to survive, they have this really whacked out idea of what Christianity should be. And so you have this leader who's um, the typical wackadoodle following the laws of the Old Testament, guy trying to manipulate and control the group. And it's just a horrific example of, that where religion can be a problem, I guess you would say. This is definitely not an example of what Christianity should be, and in reality is. It is just an example of what a man taking religious fanaticism to an extreme, and using that against other people's so it's very there's some very twisted things in here, and then as it moves along, you're following these people, and you're seeing their struggles and their desires and their needs and their desperation, and it's just an all-around enjoyable book. Next up on the list is number 8, and number 8 happens to be I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. Richard Matheson is one of my favorite authors. I thoroughly enjoy Richard Matheson. I think he's highly underrated and not talked about as much as I think he should be. Just definitely an all-around good author, and has written some just killer books. So many of them have been turned into movies. It's pretty incredible. But I Am Legend, obviously everybody knows from the Will Smith version of the movie, and we are very familiar with that. If you're into science fiction, if you're into horror, I would almost guarantee that you've seen it. It is an all-around great movie. The book is not does not follow the movie does not follow the book perfectly or exactly. There's tons of the same elements, but there's also I would say it's kind of a new story. The movie is like a new story. It's got a lot of the same elements, but it's not the same storyline. It doesn't just plot along exactly the same. So this book was so enjoyable. I burned through this so fast because I wanted to. I was so into it. I just wanted to keep reading it. I loved it. I just couldn't put it down. This was one of my favorites for the year. I did just read this past month, only a couple weeks ago, and that's probably why I'm not putting it higher on the list, because I haven't had time to let it just resonate. As time goes on after you read a book, couple months or so, you can really tell which ones stuck out to you more than other ones did. So some of the books that I have on here, they sat with me, even though when I was done reading, I didn't feel this sense of man, I love that book, but they just, over time, I keep drawing upon them. I keep thinking back on them. I keep, referencing them when I'm reading something else. I'm making connections to that book, and so that happens over time. And I haven't had enough time to let that happen yet and see where this plays out. So, but I can't imagine this falling much further down the list because it was so enjoyable. So I Am Legend starts out with our main character, Robert Neville, and Robert Neville is basically, we find out, the last man on Earth. There was another movie remade called Omega Man, having to do with I Am Legend. I may have seen that a really long time ago, but I can't remember. And that one may follow the plot of the book more. I'm not sure. But Robert Neville is basically the last man alive on Earth, and there are these creatures that people have turned into. They're close to, I would say, like a vampire, rather than they're not like zombies. And he's trying to survive, and I think we start off right when he's already got kind of his base established. It's fortified. There's, protection on the walls and boarded up and things like that. And he's got his food inside, and we kind of pick up right there, and then move through the story. I won't give too much more of the story away, because it is different than the Will Smith edition of the movie, and so I found that very enjoyable because the movie didn't spoil it for me. It was like, whoa, oh, this is new. Oh, this is something, and completely different. I was kind of expecting to, just know exactly what was going to happen around every turn, and I didn't. So, very enjoyable. Number 8, I Am Legend. Pick it up today. You can wait till tomorrow. It's fine. Number 7 on the list is The Cipher by Kathe Koja. I'm currently reading Bad Brains by Kathe Koja right now, and I've heard that Bad Brains is better than Cipher, so we will see. It's definitely a different story altogether so far, but the Cipher was very weird, unique. I don't think I've ever read something quite like the Cipher. The Cipher takes place mostly in this apartment building. It takes place in a few other areas, but mostly in this one apartment building. And we start off with one of the main characters, Nakota. And Nakota is a unique individual, and she has her friend Nicholas with her there in the apartment. It's actually Nicholas's apartment, and she just is there a lot. And it really doesn't take too long to get into it. They have found what they call the fun hole down in like a maintenance closet, and it seems to be just this black hole, and they don't know why it's there, where it goes to, what's inside, anything like that. And but it has this draw to it that makes them want to always be around it, to kind of push the boundaries of what they do with this fun hole. And so really the kind of the first thing they do is, like, I think it was crickets or something, I forget, but they put some bugs down there in a jar, and see what happens to the bugs, because they want to test it out first. And it moves on from there, and it's basically their story, of the two of them throughout the book, exploring the boundaries of what happens with the fun hole. There are some explicit scenes in this one, and I would say definitely not for everybody. I think some of it was completely added for shock value, and didn't really add to the story. It was just kind of thrown in there, like I said, for shock value. But didn't take away from the story either, because it was thoroughly enjoyable. And so it was kind of one of those things where you roll your eyes and you just, okay, whatever, and you go past it like this is not reality. This is just, sure. And then you just move on, so it is enjoyable, but you have to get through a couple of areas where it's just, silly. So number 7, The Cipher. Number 6, another appearance by Richard Matheson, one of my favorites, A Stir of Echoes. I really enjoyed this book. You may have seen the Kevin Bacon movie adaptation of this movie a while ago, early 2000s, maybe somewhere in there. Might even be a little bit later than that, but I want to say around early 2000s. And it is called Stir of Echoes, the Kevin Bacon version. The book is thoroughly enjoyable. It moves at a good pace. It is not slow and dragged down really in any parts. The pacing is one of the things I remember about this book, that it just moved along really well, really smooth. All right, so we start off this book with our main characters, Frank and his wife Anne, and their little boy Richard. And Frank and his family go to visit their friend and his brother-in-law, um, Phil, is there. And the brother-in-law is kind of playing around with the idea of like hypnotizing and things like that. And he's like, "Hey, I can hypnotize anyone, you know." And so they're going, "Yeah, yeah, you know." And they're at a party, they're drinking, they're being silly. And so Phil basically hypnotizes Frank. And you know, uh as it goes on, he wakes up and kind of, well, that didn't work, and they're laughing and saying, "Oh, you did this, you did this, you did this." And so what it does though is it seems to kind of unlock something in his brain, in Frank's brain, that allows him to see some supernatural things. And so um, I don't want to go too much more into it, but Frank starts, struggling with his visions and knowing what is reality, not reality, trying to figure out why this is happening, how to stop it, how to reverse it if possible, things like that. So it is a very, very enjoyable book. Like I said, there's some great pacing to it, and it's not a long read, 200 pages or so, and it is quite an enjoyable one. So number 6, Richard Matheson, once again, the GOAT, making it on the countdown or top 10. Number 6, Stir Backos. Number 5, one of my favorite authors, another one. I say that a lot. I have a lot of favorites, okay? Don't judge. You can have more than one favorite. I guess technically you can't. Anyways, one of my most appreciated authors, Stephen King, Pet Sematary, number 5 on the list. This book, man, it's such a good book. It's so good. Normally, I wouldn't recommend reading a book solely, like just reading the audiobook, but for this one, the audiobook is so good. I read it on a trip. I had to drive to Idaho from California, so I had like a 10-hour drive and 10-hour drive back, and I think it's like an 18-hour audiobook or something like that, somewhere around there. And so I was like, perfect, I'm gonna pop this bad boy in, listen to it the way there and the way back. And it's read by Michael C. Hall, who plays Dexter on the Showtime show Dexter. He's also on all kinds of other stuff, but Dexter's probably the most well-known. And his narration is just top tier. It is so good. Thoroughly enjoyable. So Pet Sematary, this one is unique for me because I had never read it, even though this movie, when it came out, was the first horror movie I ever saw, and really what's kind of sparked and fueled my interest in things that were horrific, that were having to do with, horror, terror, or scares, or jump scares, or whatever, anything like that. This made me want to watch more. So, Pet Sematary, you probably know the plot. You've probably seen the movie, because the movie is really good too. They did a heck of a job. The one thing I did love about reading through Pet Sematary and having watched the movie first is being able to picture Judd, the neighbor. Oh man, he's just the greatest. Or the guy who lives across the street from him. So I don't want to give any of the plot away. If you haven't, if you've never watched the movie and you've never read the book, just grab the book and go for it. Grab the Michael C. Hall version of the audiobook and go for it. Pick them both up. It's such an exciting way to read when you're listening to an audiobook and reading it at the same time. It's so fun. You do read faster than you listen, so it does make it a little difficult sometimes, but it is enjoyable if you like that kind of thing. Pet Sematary. I will give you the basic premise. There's a family that moves into a house. They have a neighbor across the street. Neighbor's an old country boy. Neighbor says, "Hey there's There's a Pet Sematary up yonder. And that's it. That's all I'm going to tell you. Okay. Number 5, Pet Sematary. If you've seen it, you know. Moving into the top 4 here of the year. 4th one this year. Oh man, it's getting intense. It was really hard to choose an order for these. I almost said I'm not picking an order. I'm just gonna do just gonna do 10. But I had to. I had to narrow it down, right? I had to. Oh man. Number 4. The Deep by Nick Kutter. I love this book. This book starts out so good. It is everything that I love about science fiction and horror was in this book. For me, this hit all the boxes. Deep sea adventure or deep sea horror. The just the terror of what it would be like to be in an underground or undersea base, things like that. Just how terrifying that would be just to even be there, let alone have anything else going on. Just literally to stand there and hear the sounds of pressure and feel the weight around you without feeling it, and just the blackness of oh man, that is intense. And I love movies like that, or I love books like that, and it's rare to find a book that has that kind of feel to it while dealing with science fiction at the same time, and horror together. I think this nails both of them. There is some definite body horror in this one. There is some gross stuff in this one as well. I don't really want to spoil anything. I want to tell you about one part. This is like disgusting, but I don't want to spoil it because it was like, oh, dude, okay, I like that. I really enjoyed this one. Basic premise is there's this strange disease that's going around called the Gets, and this Gets causes everybody to break out in spots, but also to, and they're starting to kind of deteriorate, but also completely lose their memory and their understanding of what is going on. And it starts slow and then really deteriorates over time. And our main character is a veterinarian, or like a surgeon, animal surgeon, what have you. And his brother is kind of like a savant. He's like a genius, and he happens to be on this base, I guess, for lack of a better word, that is down undersea, like 8 miles down in the the Mariana Trench, and he's down in this base, and the brother gets kind of a call from the government saying, hey, you need to come here, and we need you. They're down there looking for they think they may have found an answer to curing or solving the problem with the Gets, the disease that's going on. And so that's kind of the basic premise, and then the rest of the book pretty much takes place on the underwater base. Sorry, I keep doing that. Underground, underwater, undersea, under ocean, in the depths. It takes place in the depths of the sea. I like that better. Okay, number 4, The Deep. Now, I did read this one this month, and so it hasn't resonated with me for a long time. I did read The Troop last month by Nick Kutter, and I enjoyed The Deep way more than The Troop, even though I love The Troop. I thought The Troop was great. Deep is way better. So, but if you're not into body horror or things like that, you're gonna have a hard time with Deep. We're on to number 3, and for number 3, I actually have 3 books. Now, this isn't a troll. This isn't like, oh, you did a top 10 and now but you actually have like 15 books. No. Number 3 is The Edge of Tomorrow. And the reason I have 3 books is because I have this one that I read, and I'm including this one at the same time. This is the manga of that, basically the same book, All You Need Is Kill. And then I actually found an original non-movie edition of All You Need Is Kill. So I have all 3 because this is the movie tie-in, the manga, and the original. I read back to back All You Need Is Kill and the manga. I read this in one sitting, like the day after I finished this one, because I loved it so much, and I happened to find this one that I was like, I'm just gonna read that too. So so enjoyable. If you haven't seen Edge of Tomorrow and you like science fiction, what is wrong with you? Why? Turn off the video, hit subscribe first, and like, and say something in the comments, then turn it off and go straight to your TV, turn on Edge of Tomorrow, watch it, come back and say thank you. Okay? You have to watch Edge of Tomorrow. It is one of the best science fiction movies ever made. It is so good. Now, the movie is really, really, really good, and so is the book, but I'm really thankful that I read the book and then went back and rewatched the movie, because the movie made even more sense when I watched it than it did the first time I watched it. It was just, there was a little bit of the movie where I was just a little bit confused as to how or why or what was going on, and the book explains it more. It gives more detail as to why things are happening, and I enjoyed that. So thoroughly enjoyable. It is. I don't know if I can spoil it. I don't want to spoil it. If you haven't seen it, I don't want to spoil it. I guess I could at least tell you that there is a army of troops fighting this alien invasion. They're the mimics, and these mimics come and they're fighting them, and they're trying to just push them back against against an army against an army. And we find our main character, Kiji Korea. Our main character, Kiji Korea, is somehow starting his day over every time he dies. So a little bit like Groundhog Day in a way, where it's just that repeating day kind of thing. So every time he dies, he repeats, and but it's different. It's not the same. That basic idea is the same. Other than that, I don't want to give too much away. I think the movie portrays it very, very well, although the book is different, and it does have some variations to it that they didn't add in the movie. And some details I wish they would have added in the movie, which would have made it a little bit more clear. But thankfully, you can just read the book and have your answers. So, number 3, highly recommend Edge of Tomorrow. So when you find this book, it's called Edge of Tomorrow, but the actual book is called All You Need Is Kill, by Hiroshi Sakurazaka. So check it out. The manga is also excellent. If you're into manga, this one is really good. I've read a few mangas this year, and this is by far the best one. So number 3, All You Need Is Kill. Check it out. Number 2 on the list, I thought this one was going to stay at number 1 for a long time. I loved this book. Past tense. No, I still do love this book, but when I read it, I loved it. It was so good. I couldn't get enough of it. I just, the whole thing to me is phenomenal. And that is John Scalzi's Old Man's War. I highly recommend this. There are some overplayed, overhyped novels out there that are similar to this, and they're nowhere near as good. This is way better. The whole story of this, the whole idea, the way it moves, the humor, just there's so much in this. Like, it hits so many different areas. It's just all around fantastic. The idea is, when people turn a certain age, they can enlist in an army. So around the age of 75, they can kind of turn in, drop everything they've ever had, enlist into the army, and they will be then no longer able to come back and be part of regular civilization. They're going to just fight. They have also this idea that if they enlist, they're going to get new bodies, things like that. So they have all these kind of, like, well, I'm 75, so, I might as well give it a shot and try and get a new body, kind of thing. And our main character, his wife has passed before him, and so he really doesn't have anything left. So he decides that he's going to enlist at his 75th birthday. And when he does, it's kind of like into a military training type thing situation, and he's off. And there's so many awesome things that happen from there. It is thoroughly enjoyable. I did not know that I loved military sci-fi as much as I did until I read this, because nothing had ever hit that mark for me. This one hits the mark. Highly recommend. There are a total of 6, I believe, stories in this series. I have read Ghost Brigades, which is the next one. The next one is Ghost Brigades is not quite as good as this one. Still kind of has that same feel to it. Still kind of has the same writing style, things like that. But the premise is different, or the storyline follows a different path, and it is not. I don't think it has quite as much humor in it. So, Old Man's War had just the, I don't know, something about the writing of the main character John is just top notch. It is so good. So I highly recommend this one. If you're into anything having to do with military sci-fi, if you're into sci-fi at all, pick this one up. Add this one, push this one up your TBR, okay? I'll be very divisive right now. This was 1,000 times better than Old Man's War. Oh my gosh. I'll be really divisive right now. This was 1,000 times better than Forever War by Joe Haldeman. Way better. Way better. Like, knocks it out of the park. Numero uno. Last one on the list. Such a good book. I was surprised. I did not think this book was going to be as good as it was. Seriously shocked me how good it was. It is Altered Carbon by Richard Morgan. I loved this book. It was so good. I think in part so there's a Netflix show that came out, Altered Carbon. And it has Joel Kinnaman, which is he's one of my favorite actors out there. If you haven't seen the show The Killing with Joel Kinnaman, wow, that show is amazing. It is a crime mystery, thriller type show. It is superb. But in the Netflix show, Joel Kinnaman plays the main character of this book. And I had seen the Netflix show, and so I really wanted to read the book. I loved the show. Season 2 was pretty terrible. Season 1 basically is this book. Season 2, I think, is the next book in the series. I think there's a couple books in this series. But Season 2 is not good. It has what's his name in it, who's like not a great actor. But Season 1 was phenomenal, and I'm kind of glad I watched the show before I read the book, because it might have been a little bit hard to comprehend everything in here. if I hadn't watched the show. The show actually stays really, really close to the book, which is pretty impressive, and it does it justice for sure. Um, the the basic premise of the book is that there is um, uh, this meth is what they're called, based on Methuselah, the oldest man to live. Um, and these meths are people that have lived a really long time, and they live in these kind of higher ups. And there was one that is, had a crime happen, and wants to um, solve what's going on. And so he hires one of the characters, and this character is an envoy. They have special abilities, talents. Part of what can happen is that each person has what is called a sleeve, and they have a stack in their body, which is another term, and it's kind of like a brain or a chip or something that goes in the back of the neck or back of the head, and that is kind of like your soul. That is kind of like the you. And if someone dies, they get shot or killed or something, they can just take that stack and put it into another grown body, and the body then will still contain the soul and the same person, but they have a completely different physical form. So these maths, these higher ups, have tons of money, and they have these system where they're constantly changing out their bodies, because they want the freshest, newest kind of thing. They have backup systems, they got all this stuff. And the envoy, he is the uh, an older, hardened bad mama jamma. This dude's so trained, and has these abilities, and just can handle kind of any situation. And he hires him to come find out what has happened in this crime. And so the story takes place in that area. It's very cyberpunky type situation. I did not think I liked cyberpunk at all, because I really didn't like Neuromancer at all. So I didn't enjoy that book. So I thought, I'm not going to enjoy anything even remotely similar. This, way better than Neuromancer. Another divisive statement there, okay? Way better than Neuromancer. I thoroughly enjoyed this. I thought this was 1,000 times above Neuromancer. Yeah, I know Neuromancer has, it needs to be like praised for its influence and things like that, and using certain terms and what have you. But this was an easier, more enjoyable, more entertaining read. Had a mystery element to it. It made more sense. It was complete. There was all around an enjoyable amount to this book, and I recommend it. Now, there are some very, very graphic sex scenes in this book, so you may, if that's something that bothers you or you don't like, you might want to flip a few pages. They are pertinent to the story, though, so not every detail of the scene is pertinent, but the fact that they take place are pertinent to the story. So it isn't in there for just shock value's sake. Yes, it's overdone for shock value's sake, but it is part of the story, and it is purposeful. So that kind of makes it not as eye rolling, I guess. So thoroughly enjoyed. I have not heard anything about the sequels to this book, whether they are good or not. I've really not even heard anybody talk about having read this before. I know people have. I've heard it mentioned in comments here and there, but I haven't heard anybody really just say, hey, this was so good, or recommend you gotta read it, and push it kind of thing. And I think it was something that if you're a science fiction fan, especially if you like cyberpunk type stuff, if you liked the TV show, you're gonna love this. So highly recommend you go pick it up. All right, so that's the top 10 so far this year in 2023. That's everything that I've the top 10 of everything that I've read in 2023. I'm still, you know, going to keep reading for the rest of the year. So we'll do another top 10 as we move along in a little bit and see if any of these have changed, moved up, down the list, what have you, or they're just gone, and what new additions we have. So stay tuned. Hit that subscribe and bell notification so you can be ready for that next video when it comes out. And I will catch you guys on the next one.